Hope you've had a good morning with some interesting sessions. I welcome you to a really stimulating and thought-provoking presentations by an award-winning, internationally recognized scientist and researcher, Dr. Ming Kuo. You will also find her as Frances Kuo if you Google her. It is an honor to present her to you. I'm Dilafruz Williams, chair of the Research Symposium, and my co-chair is Catherine Stevenson. I'm delighted to have you all here today. I have known Ming since 2015, please go back, 15, when she and I served on the Science of Nature-Based Learning Collaborative Research Network, a 3-year project funded by the National Science Foundation. The project was a partnership among the University of Minnesota, the Children and Nature Network, the North American Association of Environmental Education, and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Kathy Jordan was the director. At every meeting I attended and every virtual call we had, I was just amazed at how quiet and thoughtful Ming would be, listen to everyone speak, and then she would come up with the most amazing questions and ideas that would set us all up in dialogue and motion. She was always action-oriented, even with her questions. Her keynote next is on designing high-impact research, how your research can change the world. And she will engage us in exploring 2 questions at least. How can environmental education researchers have real impacts on practice and policy? And how can small doable tweaks in the way we go about research lead to large real-world impacts? Dr. Kuo is professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she leads the Landscape and Human Health Laboratory. She has degrees in psychology and biomedical science from the University of Michigan and the University of California, Berkeley. Next. Along with her team of scientists, Ming's focus of research is on connection between natural features, trees, grass, flowers, and green spaces, and outcomes related to, these are just a few, healthy human functioning, strength of community, well-being and coping, exercise and vitality, attention, executive function, self-control, and learning, and much, much more. Next. Ming has lived a career of curiosity, exploring the relationships between the natural and built environment and human health. Her research interests have been highly impactful and disseminated widely. Let me give you a tiny glimpse, tiny glimpse. Teaching outdoors not only improves outcomes for outdoor lessons, but for subsequent indoor lessons. Her study of greening and academic achievement in Chicago public schools, the results from a 10-year, 400+ school study shows that greening appears to have sizable, long-lasting impacts on standardized test scores, especially for disadvantaged students and schools. Next. Her research influence is widespread. It is phenomenal. I could never do justice to her bio, really. As you can see, Ming's research influence is phenomenal. She has had so much media coverage on her amazing work and has appeared in so many media outlets, reaching over 120 million viewers, listeners, and readers. Next, of the top 30 most read articles in her field, Dr. Kuo is an author on 6. And 2 of her recent publications in the most cited journal, Multidisciplinary Psychology, ranked 29th and 23rd highest among the 20,000 articles published in this most cited journal. Next. Dr. Kuo's work has had substantial impact on practice and policy, and this is critical, how she has influenced policy as well as scientific audiences. According to the Chicago Tribune, her findings played a key role in the city of Chicago's largest tree planting in history, a $10 million effort. Her work has shaped top-level policymaking in urban forestry, land management, both in US and abroad. In 2020, she was invited to present to heads of state and corporate leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Next. Ming is also recipient of the prestigious Heinz Award in the environment category for her work studying the impacts of natural green spaces in urban environments on human health and children's cognitive development. Ming believes that how we do environmental education research can not only advance basic science, but make a difference in the world of environmental education. And we've seen what a leader she is in that. To share with us her wealth of experience and knowledge is Dr. Ming Kuo. Her topic is designing high impact research, how your research can change the world. We are so excited to have you for the opening keynote, Ming. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dilafruz. That's I'm feeling like I'm going to have a hard time living up to this introduction. So just pretend you didn't hear any of that. And let me share my screen. Let's see. We're on presentation mode. All right. Sharing? No. There we go. All systems go. Dilafruz, I can see you, so if you let me know that
it's perfect.
Okay, great. All right, so thank you, Dilafruz, for that amazing introduction, and Judy, and all the folks who have helped me arrive here in front of you today. I'm really excited to have this chance to talk to you, because I really do think that small tweaks can make a big difference in how much impact our work has on research. I mean, how much impact our research has on practice and policy. So I hope if you're not interested in having impacts on practice and policy, you might want to take a nap or go have lunch, because that's really what this is about. So I want to start with, actually, I want to ask you in the audience, what do you think about the relationship between research and practice and policy? I've just self-selected the audience into people who will say it's desirable, but is it easy or hard or impossible or never happens, or it requires really expensive a lot of funding? What parts of the research process do you think are most important? Is having an impact on policy or practice compatible with your demands if you're in the tenure track? So I'm interested in your opinions on this. If you could put things in the chat, that would be great. Okay, so a few themes that I'm seeing are basically sense of a gap, right? How do we, this is a nice formulation, getting research into the hands and minds of practitioners, translation, relationship building. I will say I've done very little relationship building. I'm a profound introvert. It is possible to do this without a huge amount of relationship building. Other folks saying it's difficult. Okay, only academics read research papers. Great. Okay, so I guess I will summarize what I'm seeing on the chat, and I haven't, obviously I'm just scrolling, so I haven't seen everyone's responses, but it sounds like people generally feel, after my self-selection, that it is desirable to have research affect practice and policy. Not impossible, but difficult, perhaps rare. Nobody seems to be asking, going for the expensive question. About what parts of the research process do you think are most important? I heard getting the dissemination is what I'm seeing, right? Getting it into the hands or in front of the right researchers and policymakers. Any other major themes in there, Dillafruz or Judy, or that you're seeing?
I thought one question which was about, don't understand why we would do research if it doesn't impact policy. Good one, right? What is our motive? Why do research?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who really are focused on basic science. So the idea is to just know more, to understand the world better. But yeah, I share your I share your sense that I want to see, when I'm vacuuming, I want to see the little tracks. I want to see the difference it makes. So the good news is I do think, shockingly, it is possible. So let me move on to the next slide. Thank you very much for joining in. I'm hoping that this will be a highly interactive session. All right, so I know you all are Zoom fatigued. I certainly am. And so I'm going to have a slightly different format for this talk than I typically do for keynotes, or, well, anything really, which is, I'll try to be centering stories and examples as much as possible, because I think those are easiest to listen to or hang with. I find that I can just space out if I have a fantastic speaker lecturing at me on an interesting topic with great graphics. And I'm not all of those things. So I feel like I'm going to be desperate to use these stories and examples to keep your interest. And the other thing I'm going to do, which we'll see how it works, is I'm going to ask you to think about what is the point? So instead of giving you the point and then giving you the examples or the stories that illustrate it, I will give you the stories and the examples, and I'm hoping you will figure out what the point is. So this is an active learning format. Wish us all luck. The first two stories are: the US DOE, Department of Education, takes a hard look at its budget. The second is a geographer walks into a hospital. All right, the DOE story. Some number of decades ago, perhaps two-ish, the DOE, someone very high up at the DOE was looking at the budget and feeling like, oh, we don't have enough money to do all the things we want to do. And someone asked, what is the return on investment we're getting from investing in education research? And they realized that they didn't have a good sense for that. And so they conducted some kind of massive lit review where they looked at how much they had funded various questions, and how many grants, how many years had they been basically making sure that people did research on various topics on the one hand, and then for those same topics or the specific outcomes or programs that they looked at, what were the outcomes? What is changing? What do we know from all this decades and millions of dollars of research? And what are we doing differently as a result? And the results were really quite upsetting. We had really struggled with really important questions, really fundamental questions like, does class size matter? And we were kind of at the end of all this money and all this time, still not terribly sure what the answer was, and also not clear what we should do about it. So I guess let me take a moment. What do you think? What does that say? What would that story lead us to conclude about research turning into policy and practice? The attempts in the chat box, please. Yeah, research is not translating into policy. And maybe that it even can't, right? Can't throw money in order to get an answer. Yes, which is actually really good for us, because so often we don't have that much money to do our work. So it's really nice to know, well, I guess the fact that having a lot of money doesn't imply that having a little money can work. Not a good taxpayer strategy. Yeah, right. All right, so that's my first story. And I think that accords with the general sense about the relationship between research and policy. My second story is a geographer walks into a hospital. This is 1984, slightly before 1984. The paper comes out in 1984. A geographer at the University of Michigan goes into a hospital, looks at hospital records, conducts one study on 46 people, 46 patients, a very narrow topic, gallbladder surgery recovery. And what is the outcome? A single study came out in Science. It has been cited 6,700 times, according to one source that I saw. And in the years since that study, not only have hospitals begun spontaneously to change the way they design their recovery rooms, but it is now part of hospital accreditation that you have to provide, quote, pleasant views for people recovering from surgery. That's an enormous shift, and it's largely due to this one small study, which is crazy, right? I mean, on the one hand, we have decades and millions of dollars of research having minimal, what they would call the just noticeable difference in policy and practice. And then on the other hand, one study, narrow topic, small sample size, has an enormous impact. It not only changes what people are doing, what hospitals are doing, but changes the very definition of what constitutes an adequate hospital, right? That's what accreditation means. It means, well, you may have a place and you may have doctors and you may be doing certain things, but we are not going to call you a hospital. We're not going to be accredited as a hospital unless you do this thing with the views. So any immediate thoughts on that? Is this a matter of will or power? Imbalance of power? Those are good guesses. but actually possibly luck. Actually, for, I don't know, for many decades, bordering on centuries, people have wanted to make hospitals greener, have allowed people to have more contact with nature. So back in the old days, we had sanatoriums, which were very green and offered a lot of contact with nature. And then now they're these sort of, since then they were kind of high tech, sealed off buildings with almost no contact with nature. So why, if there were so many pressures for people to build hospitals that were in that hermetically sealed, artificial, sterile environment, how could one study change things? Let's take a look. An idea. Yeah, maybe. Okay, there's some really interesting responses here. I wish I had time to go over them. Okay, let's take a look at the actual study. All right, so here's the citation. It's called "View Through a Window May Influence Recovery from Surgery." And I know this is directly pulled from the abstract. It's kind of hard to read. So let me just try to turn that into English for you. So what Roger did was he looked at cholecystectomy patients, that's gallbladder surgery patients, who are, they have gallbladder surgery and then they're fine, and then they're recovering in the hospital, and they're assigned to one of a few identical rooms. And Roger compares a room with a window view of a small copse of trees, little grass on the one hand, and on the other hand, a window view of a brick wall. 23 patients in the window view condition, 23 matched patients. So matched means they had the same kind of surgery, they had the same complications afterwards or lack thereof, they're roughly the same age, they're roughly the same weight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So they're matched patients. And then he looks at post-operative hospital stay, how long it is till this person is discharged from the hospital, how many negative, basically complaints about the patient from nurses, and how many potent analgesics, meaning opioids, they took. All right, so that's the experimental design. I'd like to stop for a moment and get your reactions. What do you see here that you think might have been the magic formula for this to have an impact? Obviously, one part of it is that it appeared in Science, right? That's going to help. But what else? A simple solution. People can relate to it. Results are easy to understand. People care about solving the problem it addresses. Saved money for hospitals. Measured things that hospitals care about. Any more? These are good thoughts. Very focused. Yeah, so weirdly, you can do, I mean, what Roger's study has affected is our understanding of recovery from everything, not just gallbladder surgery and not just surgery in general, but everything. And the outcomes are all things that a hospital administrator is going to really care about. The shorter their post-op stay, the sooner I turn that bed over and I get a new patient, I can take care of another person. Fewer negative evaluation from nurses means less wear and tear on the staff. Fewer potent analgesics. That potent analgesics are associated with a whole host of problems, including what is the word when you're hooked on them? being hooked on them. All right, so good. See, you guys have already figured out what I have to say in this talk. I can go home. I am home. I mean, I can just relax. Where's the, I can't seem to get the
I think
next
there's one question which you might want to address, and that is, since this was published in Science, one of the most read and high impact research journals, do you think that was important? Where the research was published?
Absolutely, I do. There's no question to me that if you had the same article published in, I don't know, a natural place for that article to have gone would be Environment and Behavior, or it could have gone to, I don't know, maybe even a hospital. Well, let's just say Environment and Behavior. Then I don't think it would have gone as far. First, because it would be less likely for people to pick up on it, just to encounter it. And second of all, because science simply conveys a kind of weight and imprimatur of it gives you authority. So definitely that helps. But my work has appeared in Environment and Behavior, and journals that nobody has ever heard of. So they're good journals. I'm not saying they're terrible journals, but I'm saying it's not like science, right? Science, people know, oh, something's published in Science, it must be good. Honestly, I don't even know if lay people necessarily think of Nature as a fancy journal, but New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA, that would be big, right? So yes, I do think your publication outlet matters, but I don't think it is necessary. It helps. All right, so I'm gonna focus just on the kind of the first part of the research process, which is choosing your variables and to some extent your design. We can talk about dissemination, but honestly, my feeling is, and that's what that question was about, my feeling is that if you have the right results, you can do almost nothing in the way of dissemination, and the findings will reach the people they need to reach, which is bizarre, right? It's completely counter to how we've been thinking about things. Oh my gosh, I have to crank out my publications, I have to teach my classes, I have to do my service work, sit on committees, and then I also need to put all this work into disseminating, getting stuff into the hands of policymakers, explaining to them, blah, 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 building relationships. I'm sure all of that helps, but it's not what I have done. So, or it's been a minimal part of my to-do list. All right. So it looks like we've got a few things in chat. Are they things I need to address? No. Okay. Let's talk about choosing variables. And we're going to go back to, I'm going to make you guys think about these. All right. So here are pairs of options for potential independent variables you could use in a study. And I want you to ask yourself, let's say you're the person who, they're all having to do with greenness in some kind of fashion. That's what I do, and that's what I was able to come up with. So we're going to practice with these variables, and then I want to challenge you to, let's do it with your variables, right? So let's examine the first pair. Let's compare a study that looks at, for its independent variable, individual differences in affinity for nature. You probably know many excellent measures of that construct, versus the number of trees outside an apartment building. Which of those do you think is going to be more policy or practice friendly, and why? In the chat. Okay. Well, nobody is speaking up for nobody is speaking up for individual differences. And so that's my first lesson, right? The number of trees is a better independent variable for practice because it's something you can do something about. Individual differences in affinity for nature, you know, Byung-Suk has high affinity for nature and Tanika has low affinity for nature. That's how it is. You can't, as a policymaker, there's nothing you can do about that. I'm not saying this is in any way not, actually, let me give you two disclaimers right now. When I say I'm interested in policy and practice impact, I am not saying scientific impact is not important or that the things that I'm recommending here are helpful for scientific impact as well as policy impact. All I'm saying is these are things to think about when you're trying to make practice and policy impact, right? That's my first disclaimer. So I am not saying it is not scientifically valid or interesting or important to study individual differences. What I'm saying is that kind of variable is not going to buy you practice and policy differences by itself. Okay. The second really important disclaimer here, which I think is important for my qualitative researchers in the audience, is that I'm focusing on broad impacts, right? So what can you do that changes how lots of people do something in some small, tiny way in the world, or our rules about how people do things? Small tweaks that lots of people adopt, right? So it's a broad impact, not a deep impact. I think the key to a deep impact where you do a piece of work where a practitioner reads it and they are forever changed in a fundamental and profound way, that you're not going to get from quantitative work. You're not going to get from the kind of work that I'm mostly using examples from here today. So for my qualitative folks, I think you should probably think about how to achieve deep impact in your work. And also, I'd be interested in whether you think the suggestions I'm making here apply to qualitative work. So when we get done with this set of examples, I'm gonna try to remember to ask you about that, okay? All right, so how do we achieve broad impact on practice and policy? Let's compare the amount of money spent on tree planting versus, as an independent variable, versus the attractiveness of school grounds. Any thoughts? Which of those, a study on, okay, money spent? All right. Easily measurable, easy for policymakers to advocate for. It's concrete, right? All right, good. Let's take a look at the next one. And by the way, for all of these, I want you to push back when we're done with the whole set. I want you to push back if you want to push back, because you should, okay? The third pair, slides of green versus barren place settings versus actual green versus barren place settings. Which of those is more likely to have an impact on policy or practice? Susan Capello, that's a good question. Bring it up in the next slide, would you? That would be great. Slides or actual? In person. All right, so that seems to be the consensus here. I think that's the case. I think we very frequently end up using proxies for what we really care about studying when we're doing research, because proxies are often easier, right? Taking kids to different kinds of play settings and having them spend time there and then documenting what happens is a lot more work sometimes than just having them in a room and showing them slides of things, right? So sometimes we choose proxies for perfectly legitimate reasons. I just want to say, sometimes there's a cost to doing that, okay? Yep, that's nice, very nice point. Sometimes you get better control if you have experimental control, if you have real set or slides versus real settings. If I can Photoshop something, that's going to be much better. Actually, you know what? I didn't put it on the slide, but let me have you compare another pair of items. Let's say I'm working with hospital patients, and my two interventions are putting up nature versus non-nature posters in the hospital patient's room versus wheeling them out to the hospital garden once a day or twice a day. Those are both, the latter, the wheeling out to the garden, that's a more realistic experience of nature, right? But the first, the changing of the posters, it's fake nature. But which of those do you think is going to lend itself to more changes in practice? Any thoughts? Let's say the change in practice is actually wheeling people out or putting posters in people's rooms. All right, I've got one vote for posters. Okay, lots of posters. Right, it's just easier. If you are running people ragged, you're running your staff ragged, then maybe all you can do is posters. Right, so it's not just that artificial things are always bad and real things are good. It's that you don't want proxies for what you really want to study. And in the case of posters, what you're interested in is actually, well, does providing posters make a difference? All right, let's look at a trio. This is a mistake I made in my own work. I did a study in which I used NDVI, which is short for Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. And it's basically the greenness as assessed by satellite imagery. Very nice, very objective, glamorous variable, widely available for free. We like that. Widely used in the field. So I'm just following along, and I used NDVI, completely forgetting my formula for doing this, when I should have used, because it's also available, percent tree canopy or trees per acre. Oops, I already gave I gave the answer away. I really think percent tree canopy or trees per acre would have been vastly better in lending itself to practice, changes in practice. Because if I'm a city arborist and you tell me this many trees per acre is what I need, and this many trees per acre is not enough, I can immediately know what that means for my, for the areas that I'm concerned with or that I'm responsible for. This area is not enough. This area hasn't. If I tell you, well, you need an NDVI of at least 0.35, the arborist may have that information or they may not. And more importantly, the city council, who is thinking about giving the arborist money, they're going to have no idea what NDVI in their town, right? So what NDVI is really kind of meaningless from a policy perspective, unless you actually work with those values as a normal part of your work. All right, let's do the last one. Let's compare 15-minute walks 3 times a week, just outside one's home, versus doing a wilderness outing. Which of those do you think might have bigger impacts on practice or policy. Yeah. One of my favorite studies is, if I don't know if y'all have run into it, there's an AWE study, AWE, where, what is it? I think the manipulation is literally is it 15-minute or 20-minute walk a week oriented to awe. That's the manipulation, right? So easy, so doable. Okay, so you guys are doing great. You clearly don't need me for this. Very nice.
Ming, if I ask you, someone asked, all of these answers don't seem to be, do you have some thoughts on these answers that are emerging on what is the easiest thing to do or most practical thing to do? And if we really want to shift, we want people to have the wilderness experience and all that more regularly, more frequently and so on. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, right. So excellent. Well, you know what, but I wanted this question, but I want it in about 30 seconds. Before we get there, let's just try to pull together what was the emerging lesson from this set of comparisons. How would you capture what I hope you learned or what you learned from all these comparisons? Take a minute. If you had to tell someone the rule to follow, or what part of the magic, what is the magic formula that this tells you? Policy likes numbers. I don't know, you can do attractiveness ratings of school grounds. Easily understandable, more doable, measurable, easy to facilitate. Needs to mean something to policymakers or practitioners. Yeah. I think these are good answers. The way I summarize it is you need independent variables that policymakers can control, can easily control. Right? All right, let's, all right, so that's kind of the broad thematic summary. And then we have various sub summaries, which are not so much not so much individual differences as things in the world that we can change. Money better than the things themselves sometimes. There's a problem with that, but real things, not proxies. Meaningful things, not true and accurate, but not meaningful to policymakers, and more easily done. Those are all good for policy. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Now this is your moment. I want you to push back. What are the exceptions to the rule? When is this a problem? Is this not true for your work? So let's argue a little here. I know I just told somebody they should say something 20 seconds later. I want that thing again, but I've forgotten what it was. Ooh, somebody just wrote it. Or no, it was Tillafruz. You summarized a good question. Yes. What was it?
It was someone had asked a question that what if you really want the other answer?
Right. Okay, so let's say I don't care. My interest is in wilderness outings. I don't care what 15-minute walks in your stupid suburban neighborhood buy you. I want to know what wilderness outings does. Okay. I would say the more expensive your independent variable is, the more necessary it will be for you to find a dependent measure, an outcome measure, which people really care about. right? So if it's really expensive, I'm willing to pay the cost, but what I buy with it has to be huge. And I actually think that wilderness outings are a really great example of that, because what wilderness outings, I think there's a lot of evidence pointing to this, what wilderness outings do is they change kids in fundamental, they appear to be long-lasting, lifelong ways, right? They build all kinds of skills that employers now understand to be absolutely necessary in the 21st century. Well, when and if we ever get done with the pandemic, right? Team building, leadership, persistence through difficulty, all these qualities which we understand now to be so important. You need DVs that are just as big and powerful as your IVs, at least. So that's my answer to that question. Any other? Oh no, there's so many answers.
Yes.
Can somebody summarize themes or?
Yes, so there's a question, does it have to be one or the other? And someone says, many of our problems cannot be fixed with small tweaks. We need big structural changes. Your thoughts on that?
Again, it's the same thing. If you think that if your interest is an independent variable, which is huge, I think that's fine. You have to recognize that it's going to be more difficult to change, but that's kind of fair, right? I think it's fair to say, I mean, it's fair that the world should be like that. It's fair that it's more difficult to get huge structural changes than to get small tweaks. And therefore, if you are interested in really making that change happen, then you have to find DVs, outcome measures that make that level of change compelling. Does that make sense? Hope that makes sense.
There's a really good comment here too, that research needs to help us and policymakers included consider things more deeply. How can we get that? And how can we get to a point where research can help, us and policymakers to consider things more deeply?
Meaning at a structural level rather than a tweaky level?
I suppose those are a couple of comments emerging.
Yeah, I guess I'm not entirely sure.
We bring about fundamental shifts in how policymakers think and operate.
I think for fundamental shifts, you actually qualitative work is what you need. And you're probably going to get people one at a time, or honestly, I also think the literature and the arts are really important for changing people in fundamental ways. And the recognition of the need for fundamental change, I think that's a big row to hoe, and it requires a lot, because most people don't even think about how most people don't think about, well, gee, how is capitalism affecting how things are going, for us, right? So I do think that's a lot to.
And yet somebody says, yet the Ulrich paper was quantitative and in science.
Well, but it's only affecting hospital room design, right? I mean, it's not changing the structure of power relationships in hospitals between patients and doctors, or it didn't produce that kind of deep change that folks are talking about here. So I don't have the answer for how how to change the world that fundamentally. I think just getting hospital views to be better is an enormous task, and but a doable one. I'm trying to look at this comment.
Can you read this last comment, or should I read it for you?
Yeah, if you could read it, that'd be great, because I can't get hold of it.
Is this, 1 second, did I? Okay. Sorry, my screen is shifting. Sarah writes, in order to achieve the nice to have to the need to have shift we're looking for, do we need more research that demonstrates the negative impacts when nature is absent? It seems like so much of the research is focused on getting to, and I just lost.
The ideal.
Yeah.
Which I think makes it easier for policymakers to ignore. How can research drive urgency for change? I think maybe this is an answer, or I'm not sure if I'm just evading the question. I think if you pick variables, oh, I don't want to say this. Give me a minute. Let's go to the dependent variable side before I talk about this. But please bring that up again. All right. Chris Morey says the change in attitude about hospital room views is fundamental. Well, I mean, compared to deconstructing capitalism, I think it's probably not as fundamental. And I think that's what some people were asking about. All right, so any other thoughts before I go on to dependent measures? My qualitative folks, do you have things to say? Links. I do want to say something about money. Translating everything into terms, financial terms or economic terms, monetary terms, is not wholly good, right? There are some real dangers there, but I'm not saying we should do that always. I'm just saying if you can, then that's going to be another tool in the ammunition, or more ammunition in the toolkit for making the changes that you want. So, for example, I have a great master's student who did a study on how green it is around schools in Washington State, middle schools. And, you know, we have quantitative measures of how green it is in NDVI. But then we figured out, okay, well, let's think about different levels of tree cover or NDVI and what it costs to make those changes. And then we were able to just sort of back of the envelope calculations say, it costs this much to change test scores by, you know, to make this many students more reach, whatever you call it, proficiency, basically passing for their grade level for this many years in this many schools. So you were able to translate, if you paid this much for greening, you could get this much in test scores. And I think that adds to the argument in the paper tremendously. It's way better than just providing, oh, if you greened things this much, then it would buy you this much in test scores. You can say, and it's going to cost you roughly this much. All right. Standard. All right. Oh my gosh, I'm going too slow. All right, let's move on to the next section. Dependent variables. I think the point about quantitative and minority groups is really important. And would you please bring that up again? Oh, at the end of this section. All right, so dependent variables. Let's say I'm looking at ratings of territorial defensibility as an outcome of some intervention versus burglary rate. Which of those you think is going to be more policy friendly? right. All right, we've got a pretty emerging consensus on burglary. Any thoughts on why? Because the question on the left is a pretty standard social science behavior, right? We're actually much less likely to use things like burglary rate as our outcome. Yeah, it's the actual thing you want to change. You want to change burglary rate. You don't, I mean, if you're a researcher on territorial defensibility, then you want to change territorial defensibility. But what the mayor wants to change is burglary rate, right? All right, I think just to go quickly, I'm going to go through the rest of these. I'll just talk about them. Parental mood ratings versus number of times hit or shoved child. Pretty clear the latter is more of a concern for policymakers. Shoppers' preference ratings versus willingness to pay for parking. Again, a monetary and behavioral outcome that if you're a shop owner, then if somebody said, oh, I found something that will change shoppers' preference ratings for your store, and it costs you $50 to implement, I don't know, do I want to do it? But if I say, this change will make people that much more willing to pay for parking in front of your store, and it's going to cost you $50. Oh, I think maybe I'm going to do it, right? Digit span backwards performance might be an outcome measure, but so might errors made in writing prescriptions. If I'm a hospital administrator, I don't really care what DSP performance, how DSP performance changes as a result of nurses having a window view from their break room. But if it changes errors made in writing prescriptions, I'm going to care. What about in a classroom setting? Redirects are the number of times the teacher has to interrupt what they're doing so that they can do crowd control. Okay, Jimmy, please sit in your seat. Okay, Joni, please stop talking to your neighbor or whatever, right? Those are redirects. They're times at which you redirect kids' attention back on the lesson, right? So redirects versus rated classroom engagement ratings. I think there's a little redundancy there. Redirects is probably going to be more compelling to teachers because every time I have to redirect, I've interrupted the flow of teaching. And I've also broken the chain of thought for anyone who's actually following along, right? So I can teach much better if I have fewer redirects, whereas I don't really have a sense for how classroom engagement values on a scale are going to really impact me on a concrete level. All right, and then finally, we could look at school kids' attentiveness versus their standardized test scores. I think standardized test scores would be a much more compelling policy outcome measure. And let's see, I've been talking. I've been lecturing at you. I promised I wouldn't do this, but I'm out of time. Let's have you complain about this. What do you agree? Do you disagree? What objections do you have? I'm really interested in your objections. Nobody has anything. No objections. Well, I'll give you an objection. I like DSP. DSP is one of my favorite measures. Are you telling me I can't use DSP in studies? I am not. What I'm saying is, if what you care about is affecting, let's say, let's say providing views for nurses, and And I want to measure DSP because it's a valid and reliable measure, because I can compare the results with tons of other work that uses DSP as a measure. That's great. I can continue to use DSP, but I should also include measures like errors made in writing prescriptions. Right? So you can take metrics that policymakers care about and add them to your study, oftentimes with very little cost. And I'll say another thing. If something is important enough to policymakers, generally you will find that it is already being measured as a matter of course. So standardized test scores are available. You don't have to write your own standardized test and administer it and then score it, enter the data. It's all done for you already. So when you are looking at things that policymakers care about, oftentimes they will already be being measured for you and in a systematic way, which is.
Martha Monroe has a good observation. The more publicity our findings get, the greater the possibility of misinterpretation and problems. But if paired with the very concrete and simple measures, perhaps this worry disappears.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting point. I tend to, as you can tell from my examples, I lean towards the concrete, but I think there are really important kind of abstract discoveries that we make. In fact, I think Martha, one of your recent studies, or one of your studies that I read recently, talked about some kind of communication strategy. It was like, you should communicate in this and such way, and it was a somewhat abstract idea. I can't think of the example, but for example, use examples that are close to home. So if you're looking at climate change and you're thinking about what can I do to make climate change education more effective or communication more effective, using examples of variables that will change in a person's context are better than this is going to happen in such and such country that you don't live anywhere near and don't even know what it looks like, don't know where it is on a map. So that's like very general advice, and it's kind of profound advice, and at the same time it's difficult to just say that without having people potentially kind of misinterpret it or get something close but not quite. I don't know what the answer is to that. I think that's a really good point. Somebody says attentiveness is more important than standardized test scores. I agree. Attentiveness is more important than standardized test scores, and policymakers should learn that standardized test scores are not great metrics for student learning. But if you're trying to do policy change, then you kind of have to go to battle with the policymakers you have and not the policymakers you wish you had, right? So let me give you an example. I think in environmental ed, there must be a lot of folks who care about how much kids care about climate change, for instance, right? And maybe your principal or most principals, push comes to shove, don't really care how their students care about climate change. That's not a dependent variable that the policymaker actually cares about. Does that mean you shouldn't study it? No, it means you should include some DVs that they do care about. Like, I don't know, maybe schools that offer a certain kind of climate change education are also more likely to get awards for innovation or whatever, so you give your principal not only the virtuous reason for doing your program, but also the the self-interested reason for doing your program, right? Oh, if I tell you, hey, if you adopt this climate change program, education program, then not only does it do gangbusters at getting kids to care about climate change, it also improves your chances of obtaining funding for whatever, right? So I think there are ways around this, and I do sympathize with. I mean, I really loathe standardized test scores for various reasons, but I think it's worth thinking about as a DV. All right, I know I asked someone to say their question. We have 7 minutes left. That's okay. I think we're okay. This is the crucial part. It was okay. Susan, can you say what your thing was again? Just copy paste. Oh, it's probably a mile up in the chat.
It's very difficult to keep tracing. There's so many comments. Susan, if you can cut and paste, that would be good.
Can bad independent variables be good dependent ones? Oh, totally. Absolutely. Right? Because a bad independent variable could be, it's something that you can't, wait. If you can't change it, then it's not going to be a good outcome measure, right? If it cannot be changed, if it's immovable, if no matter what happens or no matter what the situation, the outcome is always the same, then that's not a good policy or possibly scientific outcome measure.
Ruku writes, sometimes affirming is also important, would you say?
Affirming?
Affirmation.
What? Affirming what?
I think affirming is also important. Ruku, can you write some more?
Yeah, affirmation, who is affirming whom or what? Oh, okay, attractiveness of school grounds could be a dependent variable. Right, attractiveness of school grounds might be less good as an independent variable because, I don't know, I'm not sure how I should achieve that. Whereas if you give me a specific thing to do, plant X number of trees, I know how to do that, right? So as a policymaker, attractiveness of school grounds might be less compelling as a focus of intervention. But if you tell me, if you plant this many trees per acre on your school grounds, people are much more likely, let's imagine that's a private school, people are much more likely to sign their kids up to come to your school. Then that seems like a compelling outcome measure. And it might essentially boil down to attractiveness of school grounds.
So Burku just went back and responded. So sometimes the aim is not changing, but affirming the policy or practice.
Oh, I see. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, particularly if the policy or practice is under fire, then showing that it makes a difference on outcomes that people care about, policymakers care about, is very important. All right, since I'm running out of time, let's move on to our last bit. I don't have that much to say here, so it's good. Let me give you one story. A landscape architect works with a hospital design team. At the beginning of the project, they've got all kinds of grand ideas about how they're going to provide views of nature for staff and for patients, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be great. And then as the bids come through and various things get decided, the money for landscaping gets whittled away and whittled away and whittled away until there's basically nothing left. That emblemizes a situation that a lot of people face, which is you're going to bat for something that other people don't care about. And in a context where there's a lot of political jockeying, right? And if that's the case, then you absolutely have to have rigor in your research design. The less doable and the more countervailing winds there are to your intervention, then the stronger your argument for it has to be. If somebody can say, well, you know, your study doesn't show that your independent variable actually is responsible for this great outcome. It could have been some other variable. Then they've just undercut your argument at the knees, right? So we do need, especially for things like we want to change climate change attitudes or whatever, those are variables where a lot of people don't care about them, or a lot of people are, let's say I'm a principal and everyone, all my parents, all my wealthy parents are screaming at me to raise standardized test scores. We want to raise standardized test scores. If you're saying, well, if we do this one thing, it's going to help with climate change attitudes, I don't really, I'm looking for excuse to ignore you. And so if you give me an excuse in a flaw in your research design, I will use it. All right. So another example, another example is kind of the opposite. As a baby researcher, I go onto campus at the University of Michigan and I design a map, which according to theory should be easier to read and think about. Go to the people who make the maps for Michigan or who hand out the maps to new freshmen. And I say, can I try this new map on your freshmen? And they say, okay. And all kinds of things go wrong. And I'm kind of miserable because nothing got tested properly. And I go back and I say, I'm really sorry. Thank you for giving me this chance. I know you wanted to find out how the maps did, but I don't have those findings yet. And they said, that's okay. We've already printed your maps for our next batch of students. They didn't want any evidence whatsoever. There was no rigor, there's no design research even, right? It was just, I gave them another map and they looked at it and they knew that there was a theoretical reason, some scientific reason for believing this might be better. And it looked just as good to them or better than the old map, so they used it. So rigor is really a function of, or the need for rigor for affecting practice and policy is a function of how big the countervailing winds are. Are you competing for funding or attention or whatever with other uses? And also how doable your intervention is, right? If it costs them nothing to do it, then they're just going to go ahead.
So we are at time now.
Yep.
And we can just give a closing. That would be really great because I also need to.
There we go. So
through slides.
So turning research. Here we are. This is my end. Turning research into practice and policy, is it desirable? I guess everyone here agrees. Is it easy or hard or impossible? I would say it's actually pretty easy. There is this kind of magic formula and it's not that difficult to enact, and you don't have to do all of it, right? Every little bit that you do will help. It's not necessarily expensive. Think about Roger Ulrich's study with 23 patients and then 23 matched patients using archival records, right? You could have a team of undergrads just go through and look at the records and tally up the answers. What parts of the research process are more important? Bizarrely, I really think that it's the design, it's your choosing of variables and research design and not dissemination. And is it compatible with tenure track demands? Yes, it is. So that's all I have for you. I hope that was helpful. And if you have a study that you're interested in and you are interested in how you can make it more policy friendly, you are invited to contact me. And if I have time, I will be very glad to talk to you about how you might do it. All right, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I'll do what children at Gandhian schools do. A real thank you to you. Acknowledge your wealth of wisdom and your experience. It has been so exciting. Comments are coming in. Thanking you, Ming. I mean, we could have you all day. It would still not be enough. So thank you so much. And yeah, let's go to the next slide. And I just hope that all of you will, look at what's coming up next. There are 2 concurrent sessions at 3 and 4. That's in an hour and the next hour. And then we have a poster session with about 30 posters, each one really remarkable and stimulating. So please note that posters are complete research projects. They're completed. And then tomorrow we have grad students will meet early in the morning for a free workshop. There's network opportunities. And we have a plenary at 12 o'clock by Indigenous scholar Dr. Megan Bang tomorrow. And I hope you all will come to that. And of course, tonight for the early career scholars, meet with the editors and grant writers and researchers and have a wonderful exchange today. So thank you, Ming. It has been so exciting. We could never stop listening to you. Such a joy and such a pleasure to have your kind of knowledge and expertise. And so as someone who was a policymaker, I was on the school board for 8 years, elected to the school board in Portland Public Schools. And what happens to one's idealism is fascinating when you have budget cuts. So that'll be another story at another point, but this has been thrilling. So thank you very, very much. And have a wonderful time, all of you, as we move out. Okay, thanks.